Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin with session 6 with a recitation from Holy Quran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. قل أعوذ برب ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة
Jazakallah. The sixth session is about looking towards the future. Having assessed our current situation and obstacles, this session looks at ways to improve regional climate cooperation, enhance human security, and regional stability in the era of climate crisis. The speakers will focus on climate cooperation for a safe future, climate conflict and human security, vision for one South Asia, geoeconomics as a driver of stability. I now request the chair of session 6, Ms. Aisha Khan, to kindly proceed to the stage. I also request the speakers to take their seats. I now request the session chair to give her introductory remarks and take over the proceedings of the session from here. I would also like to remind everyone to please keep their phones on silent mode during the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, a very warm welcome to our speakers and to our distinguished audience. It's a great pleasure for me to chair this concluding session. And I think it's only befitting that in this concluding session, we should be talking about things closer to home and reflecting on what climate change means to us in Pakistan and how will the region get affected. We're talking about a region that is a subcontinent and it has a very vast area and a lot of people that live here who will get affected by climate change. So I think getting perspectives from our distinguished panelists on how it will affect us in different ways will be very important in strengthening and enhancing our understanding of how we should move forward to cope with this enormous challenge. We've been having climate conversations for a very long time, and with every year we feel that we're getting one step closer to our own destruction. But I think every year also brings new hope of a new possibility, of new developments that provide us with an opportunity to re-engage, reconsider, revisit, and plot a new trajectory. There are certain things that are beyond our control, for which Pakistan as a country is not responsible, like global warming. But there are two ways of looking at this. One is to put the responsibility for the historical emissions on countries that have been responsible in the past and bringing us to this plight that we face as a crisis in humanity today. And the other one is also to think, what is it that we can do at our level? Because if we put everything at the doorsteps of the international community, in some way, we are absolving ourselves of that responsibility. We are forfeiting the responsibility to do what we can. So I think it's very important, no matter how meager, how small, the difference that we can make by working together in the region. And why is it so important for us to take that approach is because the region is getting warmer faster. The region hosts a population of 2 billion. The The region has ecosystems that are extremely fragile. The region has a large cohort of a young population. And most importantly, the region, unlike other regions, is very volatile. So therefore, to work towards its integration at other levels is going to be very important. And to discuss these different aspects, we have a very distinguished panel with us. We have Ambassador Sohail Mahmood, Dr. Khalid Shafi, Mr. Hassan Akbar, and Isabella Kaziel. So I will now invite Ambassador Sohail Mahmood to please talk a little bit more about the geopolitical developments that are taking place in the globe, within the region, and how best can Pakistan position itself and navigate its way to ensure the well-being of our country, its people, and to promote peace and stability in the region. Ambassador Sohail Mahmood.
Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. It's a great pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel, and I'm grateful to Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, President IRS, for the gracious invitation. And thank you, Ms. Aisha Khan, for the kind introduction and for chairing this session. Let me begin by placing the relevance of geoeconomics in South Asia within the larger context of prevailing global and regional environment and its effect on prospects of stability in our region and beyond. Starting with the global environment. In view of whatever is happening in the world today, it is hard to be optimistic or upbeat. It is no exaggeration to say that we are living in an extremely dangerous world, marked by fragility, polarization, and fragmentation. The flux and uncertainty characterizing the global situation is in many ways unprecedented, with the accentuation of old disputes and conflicts and the proliferation of new traditional and non-traditional security threats. The global environment is beset by wars in Europe and the Middle East, with the genocide taking place in Gaza in full glare of the international community. There are raging or simmering military conflicts in different parts of the world, long-standing unresolved disputes from Palestine to Kashmir, and pervasive transnational terrorism. These have been compounded by the interlocking fuel, food, and financial crises in a world that is still reeling from the adverse economic impact of a global pandemic. The global economic slowdown has been accompanied, among other things, by reversals in the realization of sustainable development goals. On the other hand, the existential threat of climate change continues to loom large. The breathtaking yet unregulated growth and militarization of new and critical technologies is further imperiling humanity's future. Concurrently, we are witnessing the mainstreaming of right-wing extremism, democratic backsliding in key countries and regions, perfection of disinformation into an art form, and an unprecedented growth of pernicious phenomena like Islamophobia. The time-honored principles of international law and interstate relations are being violated at will. The prospects of international cooperation and solidarity have been severely undermined. Multilateralism is under assault, and a palpable drift towards so-called minilateralism is evident. On top of all this is the intensifying major power competition. The specter of bloc politics and another Cold War is haunting the world. New groups like Quad and AUKUS have emerged and are increasingly acquiring military dimensions. Massive rearmament of certain countries and regions is underway. As a result, regional tensions are exacerbating. Middle powers are facing the agonizing dilemma of making a choice. In a nutshell, geopolitics, like history, is back with a vengeance. What is the situation in our own region, the regional context? South Asia is equally impacted by geopolitical developments, both from within and outside. To begin with, the region remains mired in history and the bitter past, unable to move towards any reconciliation, peaceful resolution of disputes, or meaningful regional cooperation, connectivity, and economic integration. In the security realm, the region has seen massive military buildups and introduction of new sophisticated weapon systems as well as advanced technologies that have a destabilizing effect. There are no ways of restraining an arms race. While dialogue remains suspended between the major contending states, there are no confidence building measures in place. No established mechanisms exist for crisis management, and none whatsoever for conflict resolution. The effect of major power contestation is also manifestly evident. Within the framework of Indo-Pacific strategy, the largest South Asian state has been assigned the role of a net security provider. This further accentuates national security concerns of some other states in the region. South Asia has its own set of formidable socio-economic challenges as well. While most of the other regions of the world have acquired higher levels of socio-economic development, South Asia, home to one-fifth of humanity, continues to grapple with serious challenges of pervasive poverty, disease, illiteracy, malnutrition, and lack of sufficient economic opportunities for the teeming youth. While it is one of the most populous regions, South Asia remains the least integrated. Intra-regional trade accounts for only 5% of South Asia's trade compared to the ASEAN region where intra-regional trade marks 25%. Trade among South Asian countries currently totals just $23 billion, far below an estimated value of at least 67 billion as projected by the World Bank survey. South Asia faces severe climate change vulnerability as well, with rising sea levels and flooding impacting coastal states and rising temperatures, drought, and glacial melts affecting landlocked nations. According to a World Bank report, nearly half of the region's population has experienced climate-related disasters in the past decade, ranking India and Pakistan among the most affected globally. The security threat is heightened by worsening water shortages, potentially leading to tensions among India, Pakistan, and China over shared rivers. The prospects of large-scale migration due to climate-induced factors further exacerbates these challenges. According to some estimates, climate-induced migration is projected to reach 40 million by 2050, presenting a substantial risk of destabilization in the region. The most important platform for regional cooperation remains stymied due to the troubled relationship between India and Pakistan. Though established nearly 4 decades ago, SAARC fares poorly in comparison to other models of regional cooperation such as ASEAN. Resultantly, many of the common threats and challenges that can be addressed through collective endeavors continue not only to persist but also aggravate. Now, how Pakistan is dealing with this, the shift in Pakistan's perspective. Cognizant of the changing realities and in its endeavors to manage global geopolitics and simultaneously advance its core economic interests, Pakistan has recently worked out a recalibration of its priorities. The adoption of the concept of comprehensive security, with emphasis on economic and human security, represents no less than a paradigm shift in Pakistan's strategic thinking. The pivot to geoeconomics embedded in the national security policy is a vital component of this strategic shift. By steering focus towards geoeconomics, Pakistan aims to transcend traditional geopolitical constraints, cultivating mutually beneficial relationships and bolstering regional stability through economic cooperation. This approach envisions accentuating Pakistan's endeavors to diversify its alliances and engagements, fostering an environment conducive to economic growth, trade enhancement, and infrastructural development. It also means Pakistan acknowledging the significance of leveraging its geographical position as a crossroads between South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, thereby emphasizing the primacy of economic integration and connectivity. In practical terms, navigating complex geopolitics and creating space for geoeconomics is by no means easy. There has to be a shared recognition among all involved parties that most of the common threats and challenges can only be resolved through common solutions. This requires adherence to some core principles, such as eschewing zero sum perspectives, emphasizing mutual respect and mutual interest, a commitment to peaceful coexistence, and working for win win outcomes. The key is that instead of seeking to decide matters on power equations, the instruments of dialogue and diplomacy are utilized optimally and effectively for resolving disputes and crafting a shared future. Within this perspective, geoeconomics has the potential to play a crucial role in fostering stability in South Asia by addressing the region's shared challenges, including those related to climate change, economic development, and resource management. Collaborative economic initiatives can create interdependencies among nations, providing incentives for cooperation and reducing the likelihood of conflict. There are several crucial sectors where a difference can be made. For instance, in harnessing the huge potential for renewable energy, solar, hydro, and wind power, that will go a long way in fulfilling the region's energy needs, helping reduce CO2 emissions and accruing tens of billions of dollars of economic benefit. Similarly, geoeconomic strategies such as regional trade agreements and infrastructure development projects can contribute to economic growth and alleviate poverty, addressing some of the root causes of instability. The region also stands to gain from collaborative efforts on climate issues, with several possible avenues of collaboration, including sharing real time data on river flows to downstream counterparts, along with sharing sophisticated storm warnings to neighboring countries, which can pave the way for enhanced regional cooperation in disaster management. Also, it is important to focus on addressing water scarcity through effective management and investment in water resources that can contribute to stability by preventing disputes over shared resources. To conclude, forging geoeconomic ties based on shared economic interests is crucial for building stability in South Asia. Shared economic interests provide a foundation for dialogue and negotiation, paving the way for more constructive diplomatic engagements and creating incentives for peaceful resolutions of disputes and conflicts as the cost of instability becomes higher for all parties. At the same time, it is essential to recognize that geoeconomics alone may not be sufficient to ensure stability. Political cooperation, conflict resolution mechanisms, and addressing long-standing disputes are equally critical. Geoeconomic strategies should be part of a broader, comprehensive approach that takes into account the multifaceted nature of regional stability in South Asia. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Sohail, for that very comprehensive outlay. I think in many ways you have set the tone for the following speakers and for the concluding session by identifying all the challenges and obstacles that we face, the common threats that we face, and also the soft entry points that are still available to us to collaborate, cooperate, and forge a different and a better future for South Asia. One thing, however, came out very strongly in your statement and in your presentation is that we are a region in flux and we have no crisis management framework to move forward. To talk about that, I think it's very important to also recognize that we occupy the third pole, a region with the largest and the longest and the densest collection of glaciers. Now, when we talk about crisis, the first thing that comes to my mind is a crisis in the cryosphere. And I was actually very happy to see that during the tilawat, the images that were coming accompanying the tilawat were all about our mountain regions, because that is actually when you realize the full power of nature and the insignificance of human activity to surmount the challenges that nature will throw your way if you don't respect nature and move in alignment with nature. So no one better to talk more about the third pole and the Himalaya Karakoram Hindu Kush region than Isi Mode and Isabel Kaziel, And I now invite her to please share her presentation.
Salam alaikum and good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Good, good. So I'm just going to share my screen. So can you see my presentation?
We can, thank you.
Good, okay. So, well, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to this august forum this morning. So I'm going to be speaking about the work that we've done around regional cooperation. And you may notice that I made a slight adjustment in the title. I removed climate because what we are seeing is that the crisis that is hitting the Hindu Kush Himalayan region extends beyond climate. Of course, we have the triple planetary crisis of climate change, air pollution, and biodiversity loss. That if we don't address these three issues together and at a much increasing pace and scale, with a degree of unprecedented cooperation, it will be difficult to secure our future. These issues are interrelated. And of course, all of you on this in this meeting will know very well about the multiple catastrophes that have been hitting Pakistan over the last decades. And of course, the catastrophic loss of life and investment that has happened as a result of these risks and disasters. And at ICIMOD, we talk also a lot about not just those who live immediately downstream of the mountains, but what happens in our mountains also has distant impacts and has huge impacts on water and food insecurity, disaster and health risks, and that many of our communities and governments are unprepared. And of course, when we look at Pakistan's geography, it has the high mountains and the oceans within its geography. In fact, 1,100 kilometers of ocean, and of course, the second highest peak, that is K2 at 8,611 meters. And of course, this geography makes Pakistan extremely vulnerable to climate change and, of course, the other changes that are happening. And of course, Pakistan, as you mentioned earlier, is part has the part of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, and which we also know as the third pole, and it has over 13,000 glaciers, including some of the longest glaciers on Earth. And whilst for some time we heard about the Karakoram anomaly, that glaciers were actually increasing, we now are hearing from the scientists that they are actually retreating. And you'll see here the dramatic changes that have happened over only 30 years or so, and 50 years on the left-hand side, in the context of some of Pakistan's glaciers. And of course, this glacial retreat has multiple effects. You will know about glacial lake outburst floods. There have been 35 destructive gloughs in the Karakoram during the past 200 years. And of course, we all know that with the increasing temperatures, these kinds of risks are only going to increase. Sometimes gloughs are also known as the tsunamis in the sky, leading to wiping out of billions of dollars of investment, such as in hydropower, roads, communities, etc. But also in terms of Pakistan's coastline, These images come from the International Climate and Cryosphere Initiative. We know that there is a degree of sea level rise that is already locked in with our current temperatures. So the red markings that you see on this map are where already we are locked in to a level of sea level rise. And as we move to the 2100s, if we stay within current emissions trends, this is where Karachi will be flooded. And then if we move to the 2300s with current emissions trends, this is the extent at which Karachi will be flooded. So of course, these are staggeringly worrying images. And at ICIMOD, we are the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. We are governed by and serving the 8 countries of the Hindu Kush Himalaya. Pakistan has been a member of ICIMOD over the last 40 years. It was one of the founding members together with UNESCO. This was UNESCO's initiative in 1983 to found ICIMOD. And our mandate is to work across the Hindu Kush Himalaya, across the 8 countries, over the 3,500 kilometers stretching from Afghanistan through Pakistan, Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, Nepal, and Nepal. And of course, we are governed by and funded by our 8 countries. And of course, we focus very much on the mountains. And as we know, the Hindu Kush Himalaya is the 3rd pole, and it is an enormous asset. It is the source of the 10 largest rivers. And we know that between 2 and 3 billion people depend on its waters. And of course, we also know that the HK8 is home to a wealth of biodiversity. Pakistan actually holds 4 of the biodiversity hotspots and 9 ecozones. And that is again due to its extreme geography, reaching from the high mountains of K2 right down to the coast. And this extreme dramatic change in altitude from the mountains to the ocean has created this extremely valuable diversity and 9 ecozones, which hold many rare and unique plants and animals. But of course, as you will see from this aerial image, this extreme drop in gradient also creates multiple risks because of the proximity of human settlements to these high mountain areas and the rapidity at which water can flow down the valleys. And so we know in terms of the multiple changes happening to the biodiversity, I won't speak to this in detail because you know much of this, but there are many changes happening that are disrupting high altitude livelihoods as well as the protective nature of the landscape and the ecosystem service it provides to downstream communities. There's massively accelerating species decline. We know that about 70% have been lost over the last century. We also have high poverty levels, higher than average in these mountain areas, with many elements that are linked to this with regard to remoteness, fragility, leading to high levels of malnutrition. We also have heard that according to the WMO, we're almost at 1.5 degrees, but we know that for sure 1.5 degrees is too hot for the mountains because of elevation-dependent warming. But we also know that there is this cornucopia of challenges and risks, including air pollution. We have 7 years of reduction in average life expectancy and in Lahore, and 3 years across the country. But of course, air pollution is also creating black carbon, which is depositing on the glaciers and speeding up water flows and melting of the glaciers. And of course, having huge impacts on downstream agriculture, whether in close proximity to the mountains for those farmers who are dependent on snow, or whether this is downstream for larger scale irrigation schemes. And we have this challenge of too much but too little water. We've been doing a lot of work looking at these issues, and the various models are giving us pretty staggering and jaw-dropping data. So glaciers are disappearing fast, 65% faster in the last decade than the previous decade, and that we may well lose 2/3 of our glaciers at current emissions trends by 2100. And we all know this. The current funding flows are woefully insufficient. There are huge moral and ethical dimensions and questions to this issue. And that regional cooperation and international finance is vital to ensure that we can deliver on the near-term adaptation and loss and damage. And so we've been working to develop a new strategy. We have 3 focus areas that you see here on the slide. One is our strategic group that works on reducing climate and environment risks, where we build an understanding of risks locally, nationally, regionally, and globally, and we work with our governments to help communities' ability to respond and build their resilience. Our second strategic group focuses on resilient mountain economies and landscapes. Here we're looking at encouraging and sustaining low carbon circular livelihoods and enterprises and settlements in mountain regions, as well as looking at how we can incentivize the regeneration of critical landscapes and ecosystems. And our third strategic group recognizes that none of this is possible without effective regional and global action. And so we focus very much on the regional as well as global advocacy. And because we know that without this, it will be impossible to address these problems. No single country can address these interconnected risks alone, whether the risks are interconnected within the region or driven by global warming that is driven by emissions of high-income countries in the north. And so we have been embarking on a series of steps to build stronger regional cooperation in the region. We held the first ministerial mountain summit in 2020, which was a milestone for science diplomacy in the HKH region. We delivered the HKH call to action, which articulated 6 urgent actions for the Hindu Kush Himalaya, and ministers agreed to hold these biennial ministerial summits every 2 years to enable a much more unified voice for the region, as well as holding regular science policy forums. And we've been moving forwards with this, with ICIMOD holding the secretariat role. And so we have reached the stage where we've produced a document which has been in close discussion with all our 8 countries, which lays out the pathway for how to establish a regional institutional mechanism for the Hindu Kush Himalaya, in recognition that coordinated approaches are needed. And this document will be moving to the next Mountain Ministerial Summit, which we are hoping to hold in June this year. And we are seeking the support of all our countries, UN agencies, and all our other partners to take this forward. And this is what the HKH, proposed HKH Council looks like. This has been built of many discussions by the Hindu Kush Himalaya High-Level Task Force. We will have a council which is prevailed by all the countries of the region. and we will have a series of thematic groups that fall within this HKH Council, as well as a management committee which will hold designated officials from each HKH countries to run the processes. We feel this is an important moment to endorse this proposal to enable more regional cooperation on these enormous challenges that I spoke about earlier. And of course, we do feel that it's very important to continue lobbying at internationally, whether it's through the negotiating track on global stocktake, global goal and adaptation, loss and damage. It's very important that the plight of these countries and this region and the mountains is heard. You may have heard that last year, finally, we have mountains and cryosphere in the global stocktake, and there will be a special meeting on mountains at Substa 60 in Bonn in June. And finally, we also recognize that none of this is possible without finance. And so we're establishing the Mountains of Opportunity framework, which will create a platform to bring together public and private sector investors to really work out how we can best invest in green and resilient and inclusive projects in the mountain region. Because, of course, we do need to invest in the mountains because the future is the future of these people that you see on the slide. So thank you very much. We do need to keep mountains on the agenda, and we're running a campaign, Save Our Snow, which has been signed by about 2,000 people from across the world and the region, because we know that action today will still make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. That was an excellent presentation, and the images were very powerful. I think for people in the audience who don't know mountain regions and have not seen these mountains, it gives them a very good idea of what we're talking about, because a crisis in the cryosphere means disaster downstream, and it means a planetary imbalance as well. So what happens in our mountains will not remain in those mountains. It will have regional impacts, it will have global impacts, and we need to be mindful of that because we as a country are particularly vulnerable due to our geography, and I think that came out very strong. And the last slide also, I think, spelled it out by the call for an SOS. So we need to respond to that. So from the start, when you call for a safer South Asia, right to the end, your presentation covered all the aspects that are critical for us to cooperate, to collaborate, and to move forward to save our snow. Human security is the foundation on which a national security is built. How strong is our human security? What does the national security policy say about that? How much does it address that issue? I know that climate is now a chapter in the national security policy, and it relates to issues of human security and links them very strongly to all the non-traditional threats that we're going to face as a country. So to speak more on that, I have with me Hassan Akbar from the National Security Division. Hassan, the floor is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, thank you, Ambassador Nadeem Riaz and IRIS for the invitation to speak at this event, and for Aisha Khan for the introductions. A disclaimer, I'm not a climate expert, so my lens at climate change is looking at it from a national security perspective. So I'll be focusing on that aspect today. As many of you know, that in 2022, Pakistan launched its national security policy, which introduced the concept of comprehensive national security, highlighting that economic security, hard security, and human security, all three aspects combined together contribute to a comprehensive national security of Pakistan. Within the human security paradigm, because the protection of the lives and livelihoods of our citizens is of course, paramount for any national security policy, climate change found a salient feature within human security. And in some ways, Pakistan was an early adopter of this concept. Many people question why include economy or climate change and other aspects as national security challenges. We are not alone in this. If you look at the national security policies of countries that have launched their first national security policies after Pakistan, and I can name a few, for example, the Netherlands, Germany, South Korea, Japan, and others, all these countries recognize climate change as an integral part of their comprehensive national security policy. And the reason is very simple. According to the United Nations, in the last 2 decades, there have been over 7,000 disaster events. Of these, the vast majority, over 6,600 approximately, were extreme weather-induced disasters. In these 20 years, so from 2000 to 2020, these disasters cost 1.23 million lives of people across the world, affecting 4.2 billion people and costing economic losses of about $3 trillion. Now, you look at these numbers and you map these against the greatest traditional security challenge that the globe or the majority of many countries faced during these last 2 decades, which is the war on terrorism. And you'll see that climate change actually is one of the top challenges costing lives and livelihoods of global citizens across the world. And that realization has slowly and gradually started creeping into policymakers across the world. And it's making its way into the political domain as well. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference and the challenge there. So climate change and its impacts on human security are so significant that ignoring them would be at the peril of any country. And so Pakistan, in its national security policy, recognizes that climate change not only creates these extreme weather events, which create loss of life and loss of livelihoods, but in an indirect way, it also impacts other aspects of human security. So, for example, climate change and the water scarcity that it's creating and the change in cropping patterns that it's creating impacts food security in Pakistan. So our ability to be able to feed a population, one of the fifth largest populations in the world, it depends upon climate change events and our ability to adapt to climate change, because we need to be able to continue to produce enough food grains for our people to ensure food security. Equally, if you look at another aspect of climate change, which is air pollution, according to the World Bank, Pakistan's economic losses annually from air pollution are going to be touching about $47 billion. Because, and it covers multiple aspects in terms of loss of economic activity, flight cancellations, etc. But most importantly, the health costs that it's bringing to Pakistan and to the public exchequer. So health security, food security are intrinsically linked with climate change. And addressing climate change will help us address those human security challenges as well. Now, the other aspect of climate, because the topic today was climate conflict and human security, I'd just like to focus on some of the aspects that climate impacts and extreme weather events are having on national security in Pakistan. Just look at the floods 2 years ago. In the flash floods that happened, it impacted 33 million people in Pakistan. 1,600 people lost their lives. And 7.9 million people were internally displaced because of the flash floods. Now, that's the kind of numbers that you would see when the entire, war on terrorism, Zarb Azb, etc., was happening in Fatah. We saw IDPs there as well. One single event over a period of a week is causing displacement equal to a conflict that we've been fighting for 20 years. So climate change has real impacts on human security across Pakistan. But climate also has a transnational regional effect. What we're seeing, as you all know, we have the Indus Basin and the Kabul River Basin. Both of these are linked with our neighbors, Afghanistan and India. With India, we have an agreement, the Indus Water Treaty. On the Kabul River Basin, we don't have an official treaty. But as climate events increase, both in terms of their frequency and their scale, causing both natural disasters, but also causing scarcity of resources, particularly water, the scramble to secure those resources by countries in our region is increasing. And I think we should be in no doubt that that's happening. I'll give you one example of how climate-induced scarcity is leading to regional conflicts. If you look at what's happening between Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan, I mean, Afghanistan has decided to make a canal from the Amu Darya River, and that has caused a bilateral, multilateral sort of challenge for Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan to deal with that. Similarly, on the Indus Water River treaty, we also face a significant challenge. Many of you might have read in the newspapers that India has asked Pakistan to revisit the dispute settlement mechanism for the Indus Water Treaty. Now, of course, nobody can unilaterally withdraw from the Indus Water Treaty, but the challenge remains because despite the many challenges that we had with India, we had wars and all conflicts, water was never weaponized. But in the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen senior ministers in the government in India weaponizing water. Now, that's a serious security challenge for Pakistan. Because as you know, we are an agrarian economy. Water is essential for Pakistan. It's an existential challenge. So as climate events increase, as climate-induced, as global warming increases, as we face, retreating glaciers, and the impacts that it's having on our water availability, we need to be focused on both actions that we can take internally in terms of better water management, climate adaptation, mitigation for disasters such as flash floods, etc. But we also need to be able to recognize the challenge that it will bring to Pakistan in the regional context. And that makes it extremely important for us to move forward in a way where we recognize that climate needs to be not just a policy priority, but also a political priority. And while the national security policy, for example, puts climate change right up there in terms of the national security challenges that we face, the political adoption of climate and the allocation of resources to climate adaptation or climate mitigation, we're not seeing that kind of allocation of resources that we would like to see when it comes to meeting the climate challenge. I think slowly and gradually, there is greater political recognition of the risks and the challenges that climate change is giving to Pakistan. We hope that that increases. The other thing that I think is extremely important for us to focus on is enhancing our own capacities and capabilities. And in this, I'll talk about 3 areas where I think we really need to be enhancing our capacity. The first is research and data collection. As the entire international community moves into climate diplomacy and as the region goes into negotiations or climate discussions, Pakistan needs to be, effectively have the accurate data and research on the impacts that climate is having on Pakistan. It's very important because when you go into technical discussions, we've found that over the last 2 decades, there have been a number of track 2 events with our neighbors in the region where we found that we've been lacking in data collection compared to some of our neighbors who are doing a lot more accurate data collection in terms of, for example, groundwater aquifer, in terms of water flows, in terms of how glaciers are reducing in their regions. So we need to really pick up pace in terms of our scientific research and our data collection on climate. The second, I think, is very important is our capacity in international law. this is an area where increasingly Pakistan recognizes that we need to enhance our capabilities and capacities. As more and more discussions happen at the international level where new frameworks are being developed, loss and damage is, for example, one of them, but others in climate finance, etc. We need to have the legal expertise, the international law expertise, and the arbitration expertise to be able to negotiate effectively at these forums, both in the regional context, but also in the international context, to secure Pakistan's interests at these multiple forums. And the third is climate diplomacy. Over the last, 5-6 years, climate diplomacy has really picked pace. COP 27, COP 26, 27, 28 have become extremely important. Pakistan, for example, can play a leading role in representing the global South when it comes to climate diplomacy. And we saw that reflected at COP 27, where under the previous government, which is, I think, the PDM government, Pakistan was very effective. We brought loss and damage onto the agenda. We were really active in crafting that discussion around what it means for the global South and for Pakistan particularly. But perhaps, because we're in a political transition, etc., we did not see the same effectiveness in the last COP. But I think this is one area where we really need to focus on. We need to enhance our skills and capabilities to be able to play an effective role when it comes to climate diplomacy globally. In the end, I would say that there is no replacement for regional dialogue and discussion and diplomacy when it comes to meeting the climate challenge. Whether it is smog, whether it is the reduction in glaciers, whether it is water scarcity, these are all regional challenges that Pakistan faces. And so Pakistan really needs to, and I think Ambassador Sohail is better placed to talk about how we can engage with our neighbors. He rightly pointed out that the most important of those mechanisms that we had and organizations that we had has become ineffective, which is SARC, because of India. And we hope that that can be revived. But we can look at finding other mechanisms where we can engage regionally on climate. It's extremely important for our long-term national security to be able to engage on these issues with all of our neighbors. And lastly, I think we also need to look at where we don't have agreements, existing agreements or mechanisms that govern water flows from one country to another. We should explore whether it is in our national interest to have an agreement on those areas. And for example, Kabul River Basin is one of those areas that we can explore. So in the end, I would just like to highlight that climate is a real and present danger. It is impacting lives and livelihoods today. It is only going to increase in the near future. And for Pakistan, both from a security perspective and especially from a human security perspective, it's important for us to now, and I'm glad the IRS has organized this 3-day seminar on climate, because we need to really recognize the existential element of climate change. Many people would say floods have happened before. What's different? We've had water sharing for decades. What's different? What's different really is that today extreme weather events have tripled in frequency. They've increased in scale. So the floods impacts that were happening in the 1970s or the 80s, they have multiplied in terms of the damage and loss that it's incurring Pakistan. Not only that, look at the fiscal impact that one single climate-induced event has for a country that is going through the economic challenges that Pakistan is going through. We have to reallocate our resources. If you look at the amount of money that we've had to reallocate and the priorities that we've had to reallocate over the last 20 years in terms of our fiscal and our resource expenditure in just disaster reconstruction, rehabilitation, it's significant, and I would say that it contributes to the economic uncertainty that we have today. I think a large contributory factor to the economic challenges that we face today is, in fact, the fact that we've had at least 3 or 4 major disaster events in the last 20 years. So these challenges are real, and we have to have the capacity, build our understanding of the impact that climate is having. And we need to, at the political level, because decisions are, of course, made at the highest political level, we need to inculcate this sense that while climate may be a vague idea for political leadership, and because climate has incremental impact, often slow, um, that it is still a clear and present challenge for Pakistan, and that we need to allocate our human resource and our financial resources to meeting this challenge in the coming decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hassan Akbar. I think that was fairly comprehensive from the national security perspective. And I'm happy that you linked it very strongly with economic losses, because at the end of the day, I think what really rings true and hits home is the money factor. When people start feeling the pinch, then they realize that they must do something about it. Bangladesh has already had its elections. Pakistan is coming up for elections. India is also going to have its elections. So let's hope that what you say in climate policy, and for it to be a political priority, is also recognized by the new elected governments, and they see this as a challenge that is a transboundary challenge, that is a challenge that has no borders, and that impels them more or less to recognize the need economically, if for no other reason, to work together to have a safer future for the region. And totally agree that climate diplomacy has a major role to play, and the fact that IRS, as a think tank of the Foreign Office, is hosting this, I think, is also a very positive sign. Ambassador Sohail is here, and I see the front row here also full of diplomats. So yes, I think diplomacy will play a very critical role, and the more awareness our diplomats have about the intricacies, about the complexities of how to negotiate on this subject. And in climate negotiations, the Foreign Office does play a major role in the negotiations. I think all these things will finally come together. From a slow onset event, now climate change is a happening reality. So I think that will also be a major factor in political shifts in the way politicians deal with this issue. Non-traditional security threat like climate change is posing now perhaps a greater peril to the sovereignty and integrity and the human security of nations all over the world. Because ultimately, internal strife and insecurity leads to conflicts. And that is what destabilizes countries, and then it expands and spills over the border and extends to the region. We live in a very volatile region where our relationship with our Eastern, Western neighbors has always been slightly dysfunctional and uneasy. So to talk about that, I will invite Dr. Khalid Shafi to share with us the nexus between climate and security, and also maybe be a little prescriptive on how we need to move forward to address this in our own interest. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think we need to be thankful to IRS for providing this opportunity to mutually share the perspectives on such an important subject. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying that we first need to correctly identify the issue, and it's only then we can move towards crafting a vision for our region, that is South Asia. Issue is perhaps what 2 days before President of Pakistan, Dr. Ali, while standing on this rostrum said. If you recall what he said, that in his youth, perhaps there was a time that there used to be water metering for Pakistan. I don't know in my time, and I think most of you, over the years, we see that it has ceased to exist. Now we use water irrespective of the considerations that we will be billed as per the usage. I think we can keep on blaming the global north for warming, carbon emissions, and the excessive use of coal, oil, and gas, which have become the curse for the humanity. But what about us, wasting the blessings of solar, wind, and water in which we are abundant? Our main issue is our own created. We need to look inside, and that is lack of environmental considerations in policy, planning, and implementation. And it is both at state and society levels. Let me present you some data. South Asia constitutes 25% of the world population, the 8 nations. If we were to scroll the main keywords about our regions, these would be the oldest civilization, extremism and terrorism, Kashmir and border disputes, nuclear weapons, lack of regional cooperation, low human development index, and yes, of course, cricket also. So our region occupies more space in negative literature and less space in positive and peaceful literature. And unfortunately, completely lack of focus on the environmental issues. I'm talking about the main keywords. Now, let's try to quantify the South Asian region in climate context. Climate Risk Index is the established module, and it is a combination of 3 things: sensitivity, vulnerability, and adaptive capacity. Now, sensitivity is geographically bound. We cannot change our neighbors. We have to live with it. But vulnerability is our own planning or lack of planning. Take the example, I think Nepal and Switzerland, they are equally sensitive, but Nepal is much more vulnerable. And then the issues of adaptive capacity. We, instead of being proactive, are used to be in a reactive mode and accustomed to firefighting. The 8 nations of South Asia all are amongst the top 20 in climate risk index. Now, ladies and gentlemen, climate change is a global and not a regional phenomenon. But it defies the man-made boundaries and is antithesis to the state system. However, the issues are similar on regional basis, so perceptions and solutions can be built on the common grounds. What are the major issues in our South Asian region? I think Ms. Isabella from Nepal very amply highlighted that after the polar regions in north and south, our region has the most glaciated terrain, which is fast melting because of warming. I would not dwell much what impact it has on the water and how much million acre feet of water. I think 39 in Pakistan, it goes down the sea, whereas hardly 10 is needed to see the sea intrusion. But can we for once not plan on converting Siachen from a glacier of war to a glacier of peace? Air pollution, much has been said, in top 10, 8 cities of South Asia. And I think we, the first 2 rows, have spent our time, but what about the ones in the back benches? That what would be their state once they cross the age of 60 and 65? Rising sea level for Maldives, Sri Lanka, Karachi, Bangladesh, Mumbai. And one more element, the youth. We say that human capital is our main resource. In Pakistan, 63% of the population is below 30 years of age. But unfortunately, majority of them, the youth, they are suffering from ecological anxiety. It's a very interesting scale of hog eco-anxiety, and the helplessness, the depression, the mood swings affected. And it's much more dangerous once they don't realize that they are suffering from it. Coupled with it is a lack of climate literacy. Ladies and gentlemen, in our part of the world, unfortunately, climate change is not a priority among masses. Here, normally the people say that it's difficult to make the end of the month. Why to care about the end of the world? We may deny, but a substantial portion of people here believe that it is an elitist talk and not popular among the masses. Coming over to the vision for South Asia, let me confess that it's a very big and loaded term, perhaps difficult to do justice. But what I can say is that climate being a cross-cutting subject need a whole of the nation and region approach. It needs to be dealt both with bottom-up and top-down approach at state and society levels. And first of all, at state level is the climate leadership. You see, in USA, we had Mr. Trump, anti-climate, Mr. Gok, his minister, even said that warming is better as Alaska and Serbia would become the fruit baskets of the grain. But what happened? Elections came, Mr. Biden, right on the first day, America was back in the Paris Agreement. We have the red and blue, but the purple states. So elections, climate strategy is important. Come south, what happened in Brazil? Brazil has Amazon forests, which are known as the lungs of the world. They are the 20% carbon sink sources. Mr. Bolsonaro, ex-president, is on record of saying that environmental regulations is an hindrance to the economic development of Brazil. But elections come and Mr. Lula da Silva is selected, and he says that Brazil would be at the forefront on climate leadership at global scale. Move west, we have Australia, the largest exporter of coal. And over there, Mr. Prime Minister Maurice Scott, he literally held a piece of coal in the parliament and said, don't be afraid. But then elections came and Mr. Anthony Case, and he says that again, Australia would go for the global good and climate action. I think Ma'am Aisha rightly said, Bangladesh had elections on 7th January, just 15 days ago. After 15 days, you and me, we would be putting our votes. In India, after 3 months, is environment a consideration in the top leadership? I leave the answer to you. Let's move over to the society. Do the people of South Asia realize the danger in which they are living? Are the living habits sustainable? Because sustainability, it is said that we have not inherited this world from our fathers, but in fact, we have borrowed it from our children. Do we do the 5 R's? The 5 R's, first of all, realize. Do we walk the talk? Second, reduce. Do we reduce fuel, water, and energy? Last year, I was in Korea. There was a very interesting professor, Dr. Kim. He had his apartment on the 7th floor. He was 62 years of age, the retirement age being 65. And he used to use the chairs because according to him, it was 2 folds. He was building his physical stamina and he did not feel comfortable that lift for a single person going up and down. I think we can realize what our state is. Reuse, paper, bag, tire. I think all of us can have some solace that we don't have water bottles over here today in IRS. And then recycle the compost. And lastly, rest and realize the importance of the nature. We are lucky to have Margila Hills, but what about the bulk of the other population? Ladies and gentlemen, what we need to do in South Asia is to go for climate securitization. We need to develop a collective threat perception of climate change. Then we need to politicize it by making it a part of public debate, framing a security question about our existential threat and the intergenerational crime, and forcing the decision makers to adopt emergency action is what is needed. We had our 10 billion pre-tsunami. We had the Sundarban project. We had the living Indus. Why not having collective living Ganges, living Brahmaputra, the surviving K2 and the Everest together? We need to have a framework, a South Asian environmental framework. The environmental considerations should be enshrined in the constitution of all states, as said by earlier speaker. The ministries must have quantified tangible objectives and specific timelines. Multilateralism, regional connectivity, technology-enabled and data-driven solutions incorporating the indigenous people. We had COVID. It should have had been an eye-opener. Perhaps we need to look beyond the myopic views of isolationism and go for regional collective solutions. We also need to look at the success stories in South Asia. Bangladesh in financing. I think Bhutan, where the emissions are in negative, they absorb more carbon and emit less. At state level, there's a crisis and opportunity. It would be in national interest of Pakistan to show that we not only want to live in peace with our neighbors, but we also want to live in peace with the nature. We were a frontline state in war on terror, and we need to be a frontline state on climate action, at least at South Asian level. Thus, to conclude, I would say that South Asia as a region needs to pursue climate action on war footing to manage the avoidable so that we can avoid the unmanageable. Because in this case, as a region, we sink or swim together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shafi. I think what you have highlighted and what is extremely important is that we need to put our own house in order. And I think along with that, we need to put the region in order. And in order to do that, you have shared a lot of very good recommendations on how we need to move forward. I would only think instead of war footing, maybe we should say peace footing and plot a trajectory that takes us towards cooperation. I think that, you know, in Pakistan, there is from what I see over the last few years, a general shift in perception at the national level, even at the political level, to understand, recognize, and appreciate the approach towards the region to be more cooperative, more collaborative. So let's hope that, you know, things pan out in a way in the next year or by the end of this year, in a way that opens that window of opportunity for engagement. I think the foreign minister is due to arrive shortly. So I think till then we can take some questions and answers. So I'll open the floor. Ambassador Najm, you can start, please. Brief questions because we want to take as many as possible before.
Thank you very much, ma'am. My name is Najmus Saqib. I am a student of political science and psychology. While we were talking about, you know, all these presentations, excellent presentations, 10 out of 10. There were certain commonalities that I was, you know, trying to register and trying to remember. For instance, the words like vulnerabilities, sensitivities, insufficient funds, we need to do this, we need to do that. So apparently, all of us, we know where we stand and what we should be doing. Bear with me to, you know, to recall a very small incident, which will tell us, all of us, where do we actually stand and what should be done. It was the night before Socrates had to, you know, die, and the hemlock was waiting for him in the morning. And there was a discussion going on in the, you know, in that jail, in that incarcerated room. And one person asked, what is the difference between you and me? You are going to die tomorrow, so am I. So what is the difference? So Socrates said that there is a big difference between you and I. You don't know that you don't know. I know that I don't know. Now, this person is supposed to be the most knowledgeable, intellectually inclined, and still today we quote him. But apparently, you know, when I
didn't live during the age of climate change. So can you go ahead and ask your question? Because we have a lot of other questions.
I am coming to the point, ma'am. The point I was bringing home was that we know everything. Even we know more than Socrates did in those times. But the question is that how many more presentations do we need to know that we are vulnerable, that we have to have our, you know, governance issues addressed, the global security, etc.
Hassan Akbar, would you like to take that question?
And one specific question to Mr. Akbar, because he talked about the national security policy. I read the 68 pages of that policy when it was made public. Then the last portion was still to be publicized, which I am still waiting. And one of the pages said that it has to be revisited after 2 years. So I would like to ask Mr. Akbar the status of our national security policy, in which there is one big chapter on Pakistan foreign policy also. So where do we stand on that issue?
Okay,
Thank you very much,
I
ma'am.
think, Hassan Akbar, would you like to respond? And I would like the question and answers to be a little brief, please, because we have to wind up by 11:30 with this session before the foreign minister comes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Saab. You rightly pointed out that lots of presentations happen in many think tanks across Islamabad. In some instances, I would agree with you that we know that we don't know some things, but at the same time, we do know what we need to do, whether it's political stability, whether it is taking certain structural decisions in terms of how we can put our house in order. Your specific question with regard to national security policy, the national security policy, the revision of the national security policy was based on two considerations. The first is that when a new government comes in, that it will undertake a process of revising the national security policy. The previous PDM government did not see the need to do so. At this point in time, the National Security Division is coordinating with all ministries and institutions for the implementation. Towards the end of 2023, so we're in that process, we've taken a report from all the ministries on implementation of the various specific actions which were assigned to the ministries under the implementation framework, which was not made public for obvious reasons. We've got that report. We're still waiting on 2 or 3 ministries, and then we will be presenting the report to the National Security Committee. And based on that, when the new government comes in, if they wish to go through a revision of that policy, I think we will start that process. I would like to emphasize, though, that as you all know, that it was a 7-8 year long process, 7 years, which was the formulation process of the national security policy, in which all ministries, divisions, institutions were involved over multiple governments, and it culminated in 2022. I do feel that there is significant flexibility in that policy in terms of our policy objectives, which addresses many of the challenges that we're seeing today. Because a lot of the times one hears this criticism or this question that many changes have taken place. For example, Gaza has happened, or for example, one may argue that if you look at what happened between Pakistan and Iran, the national security policy does not address it. But my perspective on this would be that, does that really change our policy objective vis-a-vis Iran, for example? I don't think so. I don't think in the long term it changes our policy perspective vis-a-vis Iran. So yes, there is scope for revision. It will be up to a new government when it comes in, inshallah, after the elections. If it goes through that process, we will begin once again a revision process based on the realities that we face today. At this point in time, we are focused on the implementation of the national security policy.
Thank you. Thank you. Ambassador Shah Jamal.
Hassan Saab, there is just one comment for Hassan Saab and a small question. Hassan Saab, you used the word weaponization of water. You should be very careful with the use of words, because the Indus Basin Treaty that we have with India, it's one of the best treaties that have, which has withstood the time factor, so many things. Yes, so that's why from a platform like this, use the word weaponization gives a different meaning. And there is already lots of disinformation, misinformation on the issue. Therefore, we should be careful on this subject. Talking about the presentation Isabella gave, that was an excellent presentation. I really liked it. And the initiative that they have taken of having HKH Council, this is the right time to come up with such initiative where a regional cooperation and international approach could be worked out. So Isabella, I just want to ask you one thing. You talked about the pollution also. Yesterday, one of the speakers from Nepal said that their mountains are becoming black. So how much that pollution is impacting the water quality that is coming to our plains, and how worried we should be that in the short term, I would not be talking about the turn of the century. I want your understanding what is going to happen in the next 5 years in terms of the pollution level rising and its contamination effect on the water. Thank you.
Isabella, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. So in terms of air pollution, so some of the biggest, most immediate short-term impacts are on human health in the context of bronchitis, of cancers, and a whole host of other diseases that polluted air brings to us. So that is the most immediate direct impact of air quality. It's on the air we breathe, it's coming into our lungs, and it's going into various organs and causing various diseases. And the science is now pretty categorical on that. In terms of water and water quality directly, I'm not sure that I don't know the science on that one, but of course I can ask our specialists. But what I was speaking about is the black carbon, which are the larger air pollutant particles that drop on the glaciers and the snow. And because they are black, they create a more accelerated melt as the black concentrates the energy from the sun and creates more melting. So that's the other phenomenon that is happening at the moment, and is how much it's responsible for accelerated glacial melt. One of our specialists will probably know that detail, but we know that it is causing accelerated warming, and it's happening now. In terms of what the trajectory is, it's about pollution abatement, it's about clean technologies. And so that obviously is an additional investment for the whole range of enterprises right across South Asia that are emitting some of this pollution. Of course, I'm from Britain, and I know that, of course, Britain's air pollution levels are pretty good now. Well, why? Because we exported most of our industry to South Asia and East Asia. So it's easy for us to say, well, we've done great progress on air quality management in Europe. And so I think there is a big discussion to be had there. If other countries are buying these products, should they also be paying for the cleaner tech that it will require to stop this air pollution? Because again, the impacts are not just national, they're regional and they're global. So I hope that response helps. Thanks.
I would just like to highlight that I totally agree with you. I think the Indus Water Treaty, despite common misperceptions that are put out by people, is actually an extremely good treaty for Pakistan. It protects our interests, and our interests lie in ensuring that treaty, of course, it has its own mechanisms in place. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I was just referring to some of the statements made by BJP ministers, which you're aware of.
Questions? Yes, please.
My question is with Dr. Shafi. Sir, are we over-securitizing this climate aspect? Pakistan is like in a developing country like Pakistan, we have a lot of problems already. And if we advocate, like many of the speakers advocate for channelizing more funds into climate action. But what about education? This is also an important aspect of human security. So how would we, in a developing country, how would we link these two aspects? Thank you so much.
Um, I think you mentioned about climate securitization and education. And ma'am, I shall also refer to the word war footing. Okay, let me try to give you two examples how negative things have been used. If we see 1939, although a wrong example, Mr. Hitler used the terminology of Lebensraum, living space for Germans, and he securitized it, and he successfully securitized it. Did the Germans need the living space? More recently, Mr. Bush and Blair, weapons of mass destruction, they were securitized. And then what happened, we know. Unfortunately, in our region, we have so many other issues, and the issue of environment and climate has not been securitized. And pardon me, ma'am, if we go with the peace setting, the decision makers, the policy makers would not draw that much attention. But if we draw to the war footing, and war also belongs to the social province, so then that thing would be there. Education, you are absolutely right. Climate literacy identified is one of the weakest areas. And once it is securitized, then the bulk of the finances would go over there. Instead of GDP, we would go for the green goals, the less is more. So once the issue is securitized, then all the aspects, and education is one of the most important aspects, and the youth, the diversion of funds would be much more towards that side. Thank you.
Thank you, General Sir.
Thank you. First of all, I must congratulate IRS for holding this event. It speaks a lot of consciousness on our part. But I would like to highlight another part of this whole process. Yes, though there is going to be water shortages, and yes, the glaciers are melting. There is some things which are sort of doable for us as a country, for which we don't have to concern Afghanistan or India or Nepal. That is the usage habits of Pakistanis. Let's come to Islamabad itself. Why go far? There is massive water theft in Pakistan, in Islamabad, by virtue of drilling tube wells in every house of Islamabad, which is causing the water level, subsurface water level, going down. According to some people, it has already gone down by 7 feet. In Lahore, it has gone down from 10 feet to 110 feet in last 30 years. This is all against whatever we have. Our irrigation habits in the agriculture domain. Flood irrigation is the worst irrigation in the world. People have left it. There are no efforts. Again, crop patterns. We are growing sugarcane, which is a disaster for whatever water we have. We don't need sugar. Sugar is causing disease in Pakistan. So I think the next step, or the doable step, or the near targets that we have, is awareness in the country, and which starts not from the top, from the bottom. In Japan, when the school closes, the kids clean the classroom and then leave. So I think we have to go to the bottom of the society, start from the bottom, and that is where it is doable by Pakistan itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you very much. General Raza, my question is to the panel, especially to Ms. Isabel. And it's about concerning the geopolitics of climate change. And I'm going to express my fear also. You know, the climate change is a reality. So things are happening. But once we see it in the larger perspectives, so 3 biggest emitters of carbon emissions in the world, the US, China, and India. So we saw at one time Americans pulling out of the climate change protocol, And we are talking about, India being the third largest polluter also, but not getting the lead in sort of, climate change, because we talked about Pakistan, taking the lead in South Asia and everything. My only worry is, and the question is, how is it really possible in this world of idealism where you're trying in search of idealism, probably we should not be forgetting about realism also. And at the end of the day, if these countries do not unite on one agenda, so can you really prevent climate change not to be used as a geopolitical tool in the world order? Unless these three countries unite on one agenda, is it really possible? Thank you.
Hassan, the question, the loaded and complex question is for you to respond. Oh, is it Isabella? Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's a very difficult and challenging question. But I just want to remind you all that there was finally a bit of progress at COP28, where there was a commitment to reduce unabated fossil fuel power and energy by, I can't remember which date it is, but there has finally been a shift in the negotiations. Of course, India is a party, as is China. Of course, the US is always skirting around the edges. Whilst there is still vagueness in that language, it did, for me, the first time signal a ray of hope. And we need to grasp hold of that ray of hope because, as you say, the various changes going on in those three countries also present challenges. Of course, China is making enormous commitments in this space as well. And the other element I noticed at COP28 is that the private sector is really coming to the fore on many of these issues. Is it slow? Yes. But who would ever have imagined that the Asian Development Bank would become the climate bank? The British former CDC, now called British International Investment, a lot of their public-private lending is now geared to climate adaptation and resilience. So these are changes that one wouldn't have even imagined 5 years ago. So I think the ray of hope is that whilst the negotiations move at a glacial pace, there is finally some breakthroughs, but also that we need to harness the power of the private sector. As we move forwards, the private sector does give us hope. So that's the best I can answer quite a difficult question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabella. I think with that, we will conclude this session. And I won't take more than just a few minutes to wrap it up by highlighting the rich contribution of the panelists in which they have actually laid out a roadmap of what needs to be done. They've also, I think, very rightly pointed out to all the challenges and obstacles we face and why we need to overcome them, because climate change does not permit us the luxury of delayed action anymore. It's become a happening reality now, and our human security is at risk, our national security is at risk, our water and energy security are at risk, our food security is at risk. So I think we have no choice. It's an imperative that we need to build bridges. We cannot change our geography. We have to live with our neighbors. We have to live with the topography that we have as part of our country and the region. And the sooner we move towards working together to address this mega challenge that is going to hit us like a meteorite, I think the better it will be for us to make the region safer and more stable and more prosperous for everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, IRS, for organizing this.
Ladies and gentlemen, concluding our sixth session, I would like to inform everyone that now we have the Honorable Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs among us. We will begin our closing session with a recitation from Holy Quran.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
وجعلنا في الأرض رواسي أن تميد بهم وجعلنا فيها فجاجا سبلا لعلهم يهتدون.
We placed within the earth firmly set mountains, lest it should shift with them. And we made therein mountain passes as roads that they might be guided.
وجعلنا السماء سقفا محفوظا وهم عن آياتها معرضون.
And we made the sky a protected ceiling, but they from its signs are turning away.
Jazakallah. Can you rise for the national anthem of Pakistan? I now invite Editor, Institute of Regional Studies, Mr. Arish Khan, to give his presentation on the key takeaways and recommendations of this 3-day regional dialogue.
Honorable Chief Guest, ladies and gentlemen, South Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions to the impacts of climate change. It faces severe heat waves, depleting water resources, storms, droughts, floods, rapid glacial melts, rising sea levels, and wildfires, which poses a significant threat to ecosystems, biodiversity, livestock, and human societies. This 3-day international conference brought together experts and specialists of various fields to discuss climate-related issues facing South Asia. The conference featured deliberations around 6 main themes. That is, South Asia's climate vulnerability, crafting climate commitments, next phase of regional NDCs, climate conflict nexus, navigating the poly crisis to protect people and ecosystems, adapting to climate calamity, climate financing, and South Asia's climate future. In addition, there was a 3-hour working session on COP28 outcomes and regional implications. The participants of the 3-day international conference deliberated on all these issues and attempted to analyze the complexities of climate change affecting the region and proposed recommendations for mitigating the negative effects in a region which is fragmented and could vastly benefit from a multi-pronged approach focusing on cooperation. The event was hybrid in nature. It had representation of academics, diplomats, policy formulators, and members of civil society. We had foreign participants from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Singapore, and the US. In addition, we had participation from ICIMOD, that is International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, FAO, that is the Food and Agriculture Organization, and UNIDO, that is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. With this brief background, I present to you the session-wise key takeaways and recommendations from the proceedings. The inaugural session, which was graced by the President of Pakistan, Dr. Arif Alvi, as the chief guest, had the following key takeaways. The world faces a threat from human activity. South Asia has immense natural wealth. It needs effective management. 156 million acre-feet of water each year traverses Pakistan. There is ineffective utilization of that water. The government is unable to fully benefit from the green solar energy produced by households, as it has to make pre-negotiated payments to the independent power producers. Here are the recommendations from the inaugural session. Address the disconnect between research, policy formulation, and implementation. Introduce water pricing for conservation of clean water. Save marine life from excessive fishing. Follow teachings of the Holy Prophet ﷺ for judicious use of natural resources. Our first plenary session was South Asia's climate vulnerability. Here are the key takeaways from session 1. South Asia faces rising temperatures, extreme climate events, and food insecurity, inadequate disaster management, and rescue facilities. Temperatures and precipitation variability is expected to increase. Climate financing and governance are a challenge. Climate change is going to exacerbate interstate and intrastate conflict. Climate disasters are a threat multiplier. Now, here are the recommendations from session 1. Prioritize policies to reduce population growth, improve forecasting and disaster management facilities. Well-researched policies need implementation. Better awareness is the key. All issues of region, including climate change, can only be resolved through dialogue. Our third session, our second plenary session and the third actual session was on crafting climate commitments, next phase of regional NDCs. The key takeaways from plenary session 2 are as follows. The likely temperature rise above 1.5 degrees will have drastic impact in the region. Although federal government has included the provincial governments in NDCs, that is the nationally determined contributions, yet Pakistan is likely to miss its NDC targets. Solar geoengineering can reduce global temperatures. Its effects on weather patterns in different regions of the world remains unclear. Infrastructure can no longer be expanded to accommodate population without sustainability. Now, here are the recommendations from session 2. Set realistic sector-based targets for climate mitigation and adaptation. The Global South must develop its own research and perspective and bolster South-South and North-South cooperation on solar geoengineering. Climate and social costs of real estate development should be calculated. The regional countries require proactive climate action as suggested in the Paris Agreement. Session 3 was Climate Conflict Nexus, Navigating the Polycrisis to Protect People and Ecosystems. Here are the key takeaways from session 3. Climate is a polycrisis as it affects natural resource availability. With 60 to 70% dependency, Indus Basin is more dependent on meltwater than other large regional rivers. Climate-induced migration poses a significant threat to the region. High population density, diverse geoeconomic zones, and gender inequality complicate climate action in South Asia. Now, here are the recommendations from session 3. Introduce nature-based solutions for improving resilience of communities at the grassroots levels. Reducing women's vulnerability and inequality needs prioritization for their empowerment in climate-induced crisis. There is a need for more intra-regional cooperation projects in South Asia. Regional countries should collaborate under SAARC for research, policy development, and coordination to address common climate challenges. Session 4 was on adapting to climate calamity. Here are the key takeaways from session 4. Agri-food system, despite being one of the biggest contributors to climate change, is also among the most affected sectors. 37% of Pakistan's population is still food insecure. Pakistan's agricultural yields will decline in the coming years. Energy sector emissions in Pakistan are set to grow fourfold by 2030. Climate calamity must be viewed as an existential threat. Here are the recommendations from session 4. Behavioral transformation is needed at community and state levels. Promote conservation of biodiversity and effective utilization of water. Regional governments should facilitate knowledge sharing and cooperation for joint action. Agricultural system transformation is needed to deal with climate change. Bottlenecks need to be removed in the renewable energy sector for attracting FDI to that particular sector. Our fifth session was on climate financing. Here are the key takeaways from session 5. Climate finance pledges are inadequate. Loss and damage fund is the third pillar of climate action, along with mitigation and adaptation. While the adaptation investment market is estimated to be worth $2 trillion, investors will only go to markets where they expect returns. Public-private partnership is the key to deal with climate challenges. Now, here are the recommendations from session 5. Link adaptation finance with humanitarian assistance for creating synergy. Integrate policies in different domains under various ministries to maximize benefit from green finance. Loss and damage fund trusteeship should be transferred to the UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Attribution studies should be conducted to claim finances from the loss and damage fund. Public and private entities should pool their resources to generate verifiable green bonds. Our sixth session, which just concluded, was South Asia's climate future. The key takeaways from session 6 are as follows. While the world remains polarized and fragmented, South Asia remains volatile and least integrated. Climate remains an existential threat. Current funding flows to deal with climate crisis are insufficient. Water is being weaponized by India, which poses a challenge to Pakistan. Pakistan requires researched data and a clear understanding of laws to deal with climate-related challenges. Now, here are the recommendations from the last session. Geoeconomics and cooperation on climate can play a crucial role in the region. Regional countries need to share real-time climate-related data. A coordinated regional approach is required in addition to national responses. Climate has to be dealt with at community, national, and regional levels, and we need a proactive climate diplomacy. As I said in the beginning, sir, that we also had a working session on COP28 outcomes and regional implications. So here are the key takeaways from the working session. The Indus Waters Treaty has stood the test of time. A deep study of the treaty and its annexures is required. Climate threat is exacerbated by disparities in development, escalating population growth, and resource scarcity. The region is already in a state of deep conflict. Nature-based adaptation and mitigation remains the cheapest route to surviving climate crisis. The majority of the $1.3 trillion climate finance has been allocated for mitigation approaches. A very small proportion has gone to adaptation. Finally, I present to you the recommendations from the working session. Renegotiating the Indus Waters Treaty may be detrimental to our interests. Need to stop reliance on foreign funding for climate-related projects. Better governance and enhanced transparency framework is required. Dedicated awareness campaigns are required for behavioral change. Active collaboration on climate-related issues in the region is the need of the hour. I thank you all for patient listening, and this is all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now invite our chief guest, the Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Jaleel Ahmed Jilani, to the stage and request him to give his concluding remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much, President, for inviting me to this very, very important conference. I would certainly like to commend the President and your team for organizing this wonderful conference. I've been following the deliberations of this conference on a regular basis in terms of the report that I was receiving from the Institute. And I must say that some very important topics have been covered in the last 3 days that you have deliberated upon this very, very important issues. You know, going through the recommendations which were presented on, you know, a number of important aspects have been, for instance, need to be more intra-regional cooperation projects in South Asia. Very, very important. Cooperation on sharing of data is certainly, again, a very, very important recommendation that has come out of this conference. And also recommendations related to water sharing and the depletion of water resources, again, very, very important areas. But I was just, you know, while the recommendations were being presented, I was just thinking that on the practical side, what is it that can be done in order to develop a cooperative arrangement? Food insecurity is also linked to climate change. Water stress linked to climate change. We have recently encountered massive, disruption of economic activity, flights, etc., because of dense fog, which is again certainly the direct outcome of this climate change that we are witnessing. There are so many areas that brings to our mind some of the things which were required to be done, but could not be done. Peace, for instance, a peaceful coexistence in South Asia is extremely important to undertake these kind of cooperative efforts. If you look at the progress that SAARC has achieved, and when it was actively being pursued by the South Asian countries, significant development had taken place in terms of the establishment of food security bank, in terms of sharing of data, climate data. Good cooperation was also being undertaken under the SAARC auspices on health issues, which is again linked to climate change. So all these things are somehow interlinked. How do we bring back that kind of a cooperative arrangement? So at the end of the day, peace is something which is of paramount importance in case we want to pursue or seriously consider or take follow-up actions in terms of the recommendations that have come out of this thing. Rightly pointed out that Indus Waters Treaty has certainly come under a tremendous stress because of its violations by India. India is certainly violating Indus Waters Treaty with impunity, and the kind of projects which it has developed, and also the absence of required data that India is supposed to share with Pakistan in terms of the Indus Waters Treaty, is again something which is lacking in our approach. Somehow South Asian countries also needed a kind of a mechanism to develop a close cooperation on all these actions. At the bilateral level, there is cooperation with that we have with a number of South Asian countries, but then unless there is pooling of resources, we certainly will not be able to achieve our objectives. Just take, the example of Siachen Glacier. A number of studies have been carried out. This war on the roof of the world, which is taking place since 1984, has also contributed to the melting of the glacier. And according to some estimates, the melting of the Siachen Glacier has been, I think, aggravated by by 20%, 10% or 20% in the last several years. So this is the kind of a thing. And then just imagine the direct consequences that we are likely to face as a result of the melting of the glaciers that we have. I was reading a very interesting article yesterday, which has appeared in the Foreign Affairs magazine written by Graham Allison. Basically, he's talking about the COP 28, 27, 26, and the kind of good recommendations which have come out of these COP. One only hopes that the recommendations which have been made by COP 28 or the earlier such meeting which took place, they see the light of the day, because Graham Allison has presented a very, not a very optimistic picture of the follow-up actions. For instance, one thing that he mentions is that most of the countries who could make a real contribution to climate change are the ones who are the largest producers of fossil fuel. And then he lists the kind of investments that are being made in this particular area by almost every country, whether it is the United States of America, whether it is, and whether the Arab countries. And then he asks himself a question, whether with this kind of investments which are being made in fossil fuel production, which certainly contributes to the climate, this change, whether it would be possible to maintain the level of 1.5%, degrees centigrade, which we have set for ourselves, a kind of an objective in the last COP. Secondly, he also talks about the financing arrangements. I hope that his analysis certainly doesn't square with the overall assessment or the optimistic picture which has been presented by a lot of scholars. But then these are some of the realities that we have to grapple with. I think I mentioned about the rapid decline of glaciers. I think this is certainly one of the most important issues that we are facing in our region, because some of the largest number of glaciers, they also are located in our part of the world. And with this trend, obviously, we will see the rising of temperature, glacier meltings, and also the river flows. Initially, there will be massive floodings also, but then certainly we'll see a day when we will certainly see much reduced water in the same rivers which are overflowing with waters because of the melting of the glaciers. And socio-economic and political crises which are generated because of these factors. I think these are some very, very important factors that we have to take into account. With this bleak picture, what is the best course of action for all of us to take? I think before coming, I had a written text, but I looked at the written text and I thought that everything is linked to somehow to peace, peaceful coexistence, cooperation within our own region, which is of paramount importance. And then I was just thinking whether peaceful coexistence, how do we achieve this peaceful coexistence so that we are able to cooperate with each other on all these climate-related issues. And then I, a thought flashed my mind that, in order to achieve peace, you require some bold, courageous decisions. You need statesmanship of the leadership. You need kind of an overall, a climate of peace rather than sort of, exacerbating your tensions for one reason or the other. The best is to achieve, to take certain bold decisions. And then also to develop a consensus in support of not only these recommendations which have been made here, but also in support of the peace process between our respective countries. A cooperative mechanism can only come about. But then you have to look around and see if that environment exists. Certainly, when you are motivated by domestic political compulsions or your own kind of bigoted ideology that is being pursued by one of the major countries, which is responsible for most of the tensions in our region, then certainly, you feel as if you will have to wait it out for quite some time to come. I think it's at the end of the day, obviously, it's a threat which requires exploring possible cooperative efforts. We still have time. I think the time is not lost. We can still pursue our objectives by certainly working towards peace, and peace is certainly possible. It just occurred to me that recently we had a crisis involving Iran. There was two options. One was to sort of accelerate or intensify this tension that developed between Pakistan and Iran. But I think there was a realization in both countries, and I think there was a good resolve at the national level, a good model of inter-departmental, inter-stakeholder cooperation was exhibited when we were in touch within the country with all the stakeholders, how to respond to this challenge that has suddenly emerged, a serious threat to Pakistan's own sovereignty and territorial integrity. But I think the way it was handled, probably it should also present a case study for many other countries, including countries in South Asia, that in case you have the willingness, if you have the capacity, and in case you have a desire to have peace, it is possible. And I think this is kind of and this very aspect was demonstrated by both Pakistan and Iran following this intensified tension between our two countries, that we were able to come back on track within 48 hours or so, which is again, which came as a major surprise, not only for our regional countries, but many countries around the world. With these remarks, I certainly would like to commend the Institute of Regional Studies, its leadership, its team, and also all the panelists for the excellent presentations which were made here. The recommendations certainly are worth pursuing by all of us, and I would very strongly recommend that we should also share these recommendations with this specific office at the United Nations level, at the regional level, and also with other concerned countries in South Asia. We can certainly share these recommendations to the respective South Asian missions as well. Thank you so much, and very, very greatly honored to be a part of this wonderful interaction. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The President of Institute of Region Studies, Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, will now present a memento of the conference to our chief guest, Honorable Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Jalil Abbas.